Okay, I think we're live now.
So.
Hey everyone, welcome to our Proletarian Patriotism stream. For those of you that are just joining us for the first time, my name is Eric, and I'm the host of the Red Lettuce. And tonight I'm joined by my amazing comrades to discuss this important topic. So why don't you all introduce yourself? Why don't we start off with the Red Chilean?
Yo, my name is Fernando, Red Chilean is how most people know me. My ad on Twitter is Rojo, red in Spanish. Wait, I said underscore. I've been banned so many times, man. No underscore, just Rojo Chilean. I've had a shift of perspective since my very banned days, and now I'm here. So we'll get into it later. But follow me on Twitter. I need that clout.
Kayla, why don't you start? Why don't you go?
My name is Kayla Pop. I just want to highlight my cool shirt I got years ago. It says "Save Donbass Children," and that's what I talk a lot about, just Donbass and Eastern Europe, and also this region, which this country is a part of.
Is that Canada?
Get the Anyway, yeah, that's me.
All right, I'm Noah. I'm a member of the Communist Party USA. Here to talk about, patriotism, which is something I think we obviously will get into later, but I find very, very important to me personally.
And I'm Eric Arbor. You can find me at Arbor Eric on Twitter or ericarbor.medium.com. I write about dialectically coming to conclusions, improving, and making a more disciplined left.
Awesome. Yeah. And Eric just wrote an amazing article on this topic, which is linked into the description. So if none of you that are watching this haven't read it yet, please do. Highly recommend Eric's other articles as well.
One of the best articles I've seen from you yet, Eric.
I think.
Thank you.
I agree. Along with the others as well. But why don't we get started? I guess we are here to discuss what proletarian patriotism is and why it's not the same as national chauvinism or jingoism, which is indoctrinated into our minds since it's the ruling bourgeoisie that controls our media. It's their history and culture that gets taught to us, not ours. So in order to unite the masses, we must win back what it means to be a patriot. And that means we must challenge the ideological worldview of American exceptionalism on the right and on the synthetic left. Being a patriot isn't slapping a bumper sticker on your car or cloaking yourself in the flag while blindly supporting what our imperialist leaders are doing abroad. So-called socialists that burn the flag and claim that those that love their country are fascist, while spewing hatred for average Americans, are the opposite of socialists. To be a patriot is to be a dissident. That means holding our government accountable to the supposed aspirations and values it claims to uphold. It means wanting to unite the working class masses to overthrow our bourgeoisie dictatorship and create a worker state to ensure that our fellow proletarians in and outside our borders are protected and cared for. The only way to accomplish this ultimate goal is to root our patriotism in our rich American proletarian history and culture. Patriotism and communism are interlinked because both are tools of unity and liberation of the masses from our historical and collective enemy, the bourgeoisie. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the Red Chilean to see what he has to say on his thoughts on proletarian patriotism.
Very briefly before I start, I forgot to mention I am in the Chilean Communist Party Proletarian Action. If you happen to be a Chilean watching this for some reason, vote for us next month. Patriotic Union, wherever you are, we're running candidates. To get it, what's up?
In Espanol.
If you're watching this, I speak English. All right, so to get into it, there's a phenomenon that has happened since the when you were about halfway through the Cold War that struck the left. and that was the rise of the academic left to the point of becoming hegemonic within the West. Political organization, when it comes from what is known as the left, for almost 60 years now, it has oriented itself around universities. If you think about the Vietnam War, you're thinking of students of the Vietnam War protests. You're thinking about students. If you think about the anti-globalization effort, the protests in the 90s, you're thinking about students. And if you think about the protests against the Iraq War, you're thinking about students primarily. And that has been because of the shift that you saw as anti-communism, not just in America, but in the West in general, pushed out proletarian-based parties. And you started having this... You started seeing the left orient itself around the academy, the ivory tower. I believe that time is coming to an end. There was a election that just happened in Peru, where we're seeing a paradigm shift. You're seeing a party that has completely organized itself independent of that space, which is again has been the dominant, the place where the left has found its home for almost 60 years now. A rural party, a peasant party, completely organized, completely with indigenous, not as Native American, but indigenous as from their own space. An indigenous party has come to take the forefront of Peruvian politics. They've centralized a couple of very important values: patriotism and socialism. There's a synthesis that if you came to if you proposed it within the spaces that we've been discussing it 10 years ago, people would have looked at you funny. People did look at us funny when we started talking about it, I would say about 2 years ago. But I believe that Peru and the Peru Libre Party has outlined that we were correct. We were correct in our analysis. A shift is needed. The masses do not hate their country. The masses identify their country. But when an American waves the American flag, when a Mexican waves the Mexican flag, and when any working person waves the flag of their country, they're not waving it for, at least most of the time, they're not waving it because they are trying to honor a massacre that might have happened back during feudal times or back during a war. They are using it to highlight the most noble characters that they see within their culture. In America, you could say that is gung-ho attitude, hardworking, the duty that one has to their country. In France, it might be somebody appealing to the diversity in such a country, as complex as the history might be, of the willing to fight for someone else's freedom of speech. Here in Chile, it would be the this is a funny one, the cunning nature that Chileans have to get out of problems. That's a thing you might not get if you're not from here. In Mexico, they're probably uplifting the founding fathers of the country who were anti-colonial fighters, and the Mexican revolutionaries such as Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. They're not highlighting, when you go to a ghetto in Chile and you see people putting the Chilean flag up in their homes, they're not honoring Pinochet, they're honoring Allende. And if a Marxist, you're not able to understand that. You're not able to understand that the pride that working people have in their country, they're not proud of the reactionary sector, they're proud of the progressive history. If you cannot understand that, you're going to have a huge disconnect from the working people of your country. And if a Marxist is not connected to the masses, then they're dead in the water. They're useless.
That's really well said, brother. I find that there's a lot of these academic types that we've, like you said, that this was born of the establishment. There's a sort of hegemonic power in the West, on the left, within the academy. And it genuinely comes from, a sort of petty bourgeois radicalism that sees itself as above the masses, right? It sees itself as more enlightened than the working people, and looks down upon them for not being as enlightened as they think they are. And I don't know about y'all. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood in the ghetto, and I still went to 4th of July parties. Everybody had an American flag. People don't, the masses in general, regular people who aren't politically active, they don't really know a lot about stuff. They don't look at the American flag and see what these ultra-lefts and these petty bourgeois radicals see. You know, they don't see the genocide of Native Americans, which is true. This happened, right? We can't deny that that happened or anything. It was a blight on humanity. But what they see is a sort of mythology of our country, the values that unite us as working people. And in America, that is, like you said, that gung-ho attitude, which is actually ironic. That's a Chinese phrase. It comes from Mao's army. But anyway, it's that American efficiency and entrepreneurialism mixed with, you know, a love and striving for true democracy and the ideals that they told us they were founding this nation on, and then betrayed.
Yeah, I can't, like, every time I used to be like someone who like wanted to, I've burned a flag like, before. Like I used to be.
I got like 10 of them to burn tonight. So
at the end of this, we all can burn our flags. But I used to be of that mindset. I used to be very like presenting very like ultra leftist tendencies, and I think they make it hard for it. I think the academic and like the ultra like petty bourgeois left make it hard to be question that, because in the West, a lot of like becoming a leftist is about unlearning. So when you unlearn a lot of like bourgeois history that you're taught in public schools or in private schools in the United States, that like there were like genocide of indigenous people, there was like Jim Crow, there was slavery, there was all these terrible things that the bourgeois state has inflicted upon American workers. That's a part of that unlearning. But people confuse that with the fact that they say, well, that must be the entire character of America, when in fact there's been a very strong resistance to that throughout history. There's never to say that Americans just laid down and took it, like goes against everything that you would know about Americans. Like we were the ones that raised the alarm, the idea of abolition didn't come from abroad. It came from Americans. Within America, yes, within. The Haymarket affair, which created what we know to be International Working Man's Day, or Workers' Day, across the world, started in Chicago, USA. The like Jim Crow was largely started by communists in the USA. Or wait, sorry. The national organization that helped fight Jim Crow and lynching in the early 1910s and 20s, that on a national scale was started by average workers. A lot of so wherever there's an instance in history of the bourgeois state's power being inflicted, there's always been American workers on the opposite end of that, fighting against that. And that's something that I think many other countries understand about their working class. They understand that there is a difference between the state and the people. And that's something that I think US communists really need to understand, because I'll end there, and I have a quote, but we can go back to that.
Arbor hit something on the nail, right? Like a nail with the head of the hammer. My English is rusting. I'm sorry. Becoming a communist in the U.S., and I know because I was living in the U.S. when I was radicalized. It's about unlearning. It's about unlearning the message. What a lot of communists, or what we may call rad-libs, ultra-left sectors, what they don't do is, after unlearning, they unlearn the bourgeois history, but they don't learn the proletarian history. They unlearn the false narrative that America was simply, it was a land without people, right? And they learn the ugly side of America, but if you don't also learn the progressive side, you can't do a dialectical analysis. You can't look at the contradictions. You can't look at the unity of opposites. You don't get the full picture. So, and you get this whole confusion where being a communist in the United States kind of just becomes, shouting at a wall. Someone says a part of a reactionary narrative myth of America, and you just simply point out that's not true. Okay, then, but what is true then? What if you unlearn that history? What was the history then? What was reality? All right, yeah, and not just the ugly side, not just the genocide. That's real, and justice needs to be made. Indigenous people need to be made whole as far as possible, right? Reparations is something that any good communist will advocate for. But was it all that? Was it all a genocide? What about the abolitionist movement? What about the working movement? What about the anti-racist movement? What about the anti-war movement? Right? America has a huge progressive history, and I've said this many, many times. It is so sad. It is so sad that I can go to a communist here in my country and ask them about American history, and they know better. They know it better than so many American communists. It makes me, it truly makes me very sad.
It's absolutely a shame that this history is lost to us, and it's so obscured. And a lot of that's on purpose. But you said something really, really insightful. If we're Marxists, it's our job to do a Marxist analysis, right? To look at this dialectically, look at it in its motion and the opposing forces that drive that motion, right? So you can't just have, all the bourgeois action. You have to look at the class struggle. What Marx said, right? The famous line that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. He didn't say the history of all hitherto existing society except the USA, right? Just my 2 cents. I don't know.
Absolutely.
So I forgot to introduce myself in the beginning as well, like with the things that I do, but I am also part of the Party of Communists USA. And our line, which is a line that I've come to learn through a lot of help, especially with this guy over here, Red Chilean, is that we are not nationalists, but we are patriots. We believe in proletarian patriotism. And that's the whole point about being a communist. Just the same as Eric Garber over here, I too have burned a flag. I too had said death to America. I've, said.
I think it's actually America.
It's as many cusses as you can get in, the more radical you are. So I've been there. I've done that. I had those ultra leftist moments, and it's completely true that what you learn in like the universities and what you learn when you start getting into these quote unquote communist and socialist spaces is that, well, the US was just founded upon genocide of native people and slavery. And what's really interesting about, the left, the ultra left that holds this position is that they'll say that about the United States, but this country, when this country has a socialist leader, when Cuba has done it, when Venezuela does it, when Nicaragua does it, I'm sorry, do you what is this, woke American exceptionalism that I know the history of this country, and it's very, very similar to the history of the country that I'm in right now, right? It's do the Americas long. I don't know, wake up. What do you think happened here? But that's not all that it was. So I don't know. It's a weird moving of the goalposts, but once and I have lived in the South, kind of more like Mid-Atlantic. I lived in Virginia. And I lived in Virginia Beach, the neighborhood that I lived in was very working class, mostly black, very few brown people, just mostly African-American people. And everybody had a flag outside their house. And I can't imagine, me, the way I was maybe 2 years ago, going to them and being like, you should burn your flag outside your house because they're going to be the first ones to tell you, fuck the police, fuck the government. But they love their flag. And that's why they hang it outside of their house, because that is part of their they are part of this nation. That is who they are. They, find themselves, they see themselves in this country. And so the point of being a communist is not to say, let's destroy the country, let's destroy. For some reason, some communists take up anarchist beliefs, communists in name, but anarchists in action. Indeed. They always talk about destroying, but never building. What I want to build is a country where we are in charge, where our class is unified and we have power. And, and I believe that as a plurinational state, that's going to be plurinationally through all of the Americas. But that doesn't mean that, you go around and you really can't win. And funny, Eric Arbor has this little meme where it's all these people trying to be the stereotype of what, the right-wing fanatics think about. They want to be that. They're like, unless I check off all the boxes, okay, I hate America, I got piercings and tattoos, come join us. They don't see themselves with you. And what happened in Peru is a great example of that. You have there was Veronica Mendoza, who I supported, by the way. Veronica Mendoza, who is, part of this left that is very much within the universities and colleges, very much in the cities. And you had the left that was, not woke, anti-woke, but really among the masses, really, peasant and working class and rural. And, they nobody expected them to get so far as they did. And now they're going into the top 2 because that's where the people are. And so, I am also reminded that when I saw the protests going on in Peru this past November, with all the shit that was going down, people went out in the streets with their flag. They went out and they said, this is our flag. We are the country. You guys are traitors to our people. You ruling class, you bourgeois, you corrupted people, you police, you are traitors to the nation. You have sold us out. You sell yourselves out. You sell this country out. We want to take back our country. And there's a ritual. It's more like for entertainment, but it's a ritual where, and this came out of the protests against Fujimori, where people take this flag and they wash it of its sins. And so that is to say that a true communist needs to be patriotic, needs to love their country, needs to be an internationalist. Nobody said that doesn't come in. But if you're only focusing on what Michael Parenti calls the super patriot, the far right, you're going to ignore the people that are in front of you that also love their country and also could love their class if you just wake up and stop being a stereotype.
Yeah, and to that, the Parenti, I had the quote. He talks about in that book, Super Patriot, which I think it's interesting because people love Michael Parenti. I can't really think of anybody who doesn't like.
Right.
Because he's a very charismatic person. He's
dynamic.
He's pretty dynamic.
He's super cute.
He's a very cute Italian man who just happens to really support like state socialism. I don't even I'm not sure. Does anybody know if he had any party ties? Or
he was in a social democratic, populist, weird party in
part of
Vermont.
Liberty Union with Bernie. Yeah. Well, anyway, he's a very principled man. But so he writes this book, Super Patriot, in the middle of, I think, 2004, in the middle of the Bush administration. And so he says, we critics of U.S. policy are not directing our protests against that entity known as America, but against particular U.S. leaders who we feel do not represent the interests of the American people or any other people, but who advance the goals of a privileged coterie. We are not being anti-American when we criticize the president's policy, just as much as we are not being anti-Middletown when we criticize the mayor of Middletown. Quite the contrary. Our opposition arises out of concern for what is being done to and in the name of our country or community.
Right.
Michael, since we're on the Parenti subject, right? He used to talk about the need to stop allowing the bourgeoisie to create this connection between us and them. When they go and bomb or invade some other country, we talk about it and we say, well, we were there invading them. We didn't invade them. You and I, none of us invaded them. We didn't go. We didn't make that decision. We don't benefit from it. In fact, they rob us to pay for that, right? Mm-hmm. So he always made it a point to say they went and did it. And we have this
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I'll just finish up real quick. We have this kind of we give them representation of America, and I'm sorry to swear, but I'm goddamn sick of giving that to them. They don't represent the people of America. They rob and prey on us like leeches, and they for us to give them that representation is already a loss, and I'm not going to take another loss.
Yes, and I think that with with like these academic petty bourgeois anti-America like they are very stumped when I pose this question: is the United States a democracy? Obviously, anybody, like, it's not a democracy. We can establish that. Our working class people were not bourgeois, who are not the elite, responsible for the imperialism that the United States government enacts. You can't, like, these are mutually exclusive. And I think that that's what people don't understand is, like, when you say, like, you hate America, you're not saying you hate, or hopefully you're not saying you hate just like working Joe or working Jane. You're saying like you hate the US government, which I think that that's kind of what there's a point in Super Patriot where Parenti kind of talks about stop saying we when you mean they, or like that sort of characterization. But yeah.
Yeah, no, and we run into this issue when we deal with the synthetic left or ultras, when they try to say that us workers benefit from this system as if we control it, and we don't control the system. We don't live in a worker state, which that means we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bourgeois dictatorship, and they're the ones who make those decisions.
Actually, going back to something that Kayla said quickly about how a lot of times these ultra-leftists are employing almost anti-communist talking points. Yeah. I've recently been reading Herbert Aptheker's book on the American Revolution, which what I thought was an interesting practice. I assume that the CPUSA has done this before, but they obviously write their own history on the communist Marxist position of American historical events. So this is obviously like a sort of Marxist interpretation, a historical materialist interpretation of the American War of Independence. And what it does is he really lays out that in the 1950s, in the post-war era, during the height of the McCarthy era, the Second Red Scare, there's a lot of new scholarship coming out about the American Revolution, because you saw the CPUSA embracing a sort of patriotism at this time. There was a lot more scholarship dedicated to saying that, well, the American Revolution was just for economic reasons. It wasn't for any sort of like ideological thing. It was really only for the bourgeoisie. And you listen like decades later, and that's exactly what like these ultra leftists are saying. Like, oh, it was just to talk about it was just to protect slavery and all that. When Herbert Aptheker, in the first few pages, he blows that out of the water, that there was actually no economic benefit to the American Revolution for the majority of colonists. A lot of it was based off of home rule and wishes of democracy. And while it was absolutely a bourgeois nationalist movement, what became of it, like any other instance of revolution in the Americas, be it Haiti, Chile, Gran Colombia, there's still an inherent progressive movement within the American Revolution. I know that Lenin himself called it one of the greatest revolutionary moments in America, in human history. And it was the thing that inspired the French, the Haitians, it was the first instance of colonized people throwing the chains of the colonizer, or of their monarchy, imperial rule. And that there's something to be said about that, and there is a value to raising that because it is something that is ingrained in every American. So why would we throw that away and say, actually, that wasn't that great? Because that's the same project that the right has been like they're trying to dissociate the worker from its own history of progressive liberation.
Yeah, it turns us into the cartoon that the right makes us up. It makes us into when we acquiesce to that. I actually, in Lenin's letter to American workers, he said this about the American War of Independence. The history of modern civilized America opened with one of these great, really liberating, really revolutionary wars, of which there have been so few compared to the vast number of wars of conquest, which, like the present imperialist war, were caused by squabbles among kings, landowners, or capitalists over the division of usurped lands or ill-gotten gain. That was the war the American people waged against the British robbers who oppressed America and held her in colonial slavery. In the same way as these, quote, civilized bloodsuckers are still oppressing and holding in colonial slavery hundreds of millions of people in India, Egypt, and all parts of the world. And when these ultra-lefts sort of talk about this revolution like this, it was a bourgeois revolution, but it really shows that they're not looking at this as Marxists, as communists. They're coming from this very surface level, petty bourgeois sort of outlook.
You know, when I took a trip to Ukraine, I had gone to Ukraine. Nobody, Kayla, let's talk about Eastern Europe. So I took a trip to Ukraine, and before I had gone there, I had already like some idea of, you know, Ukraine as a very right-wing, nationalistic, some might even say fascist state. They've got a Nazi, you know, battalion within their official army. They're leading a war against their own people who left them because they called, you know, the new government a fascist government. So I went there knowing that. And when I went to Ukraine, I was a little worried. You know, my husband's from Belarus, and he was worried about me going because I ended up going alone. And he was worried. He was like, don't walk anywhere. Don't walk anywhere. Just stay in your Airbnb the whole time. And I ended up having the best time ever. I made so many friends. I met so many people. I talked to so many people just about their life, being Ukrainian. And I saw a couple of things. I saw that there was a great effort among the state to promote this very nationalistic view of what Ukraine is. So there was a lot of Ukrainian flags like everywhere. I'm talking about fire hydrants being painted the Ukrainian flag, like streets just being painted the Ukrainian flag. There was a Ukrainian flag with like an iron, I forget what it's called, but it's like a triangle iron cross, whatever. Just NATO propaganda everywhere, just super nationalistic. Anywhere that was any like official with the government you'd only speak Ukrainian. And I saw the people speaking Russian. I saw the people, you know, being like friends with Russians, being very anti-war. I visited a wall that had the deaths of, just in the beginning, because it was way too long, but very, very long wall. It took me a few minutes just to get past it, where it was all those on the Ukrainian side, soldiers that died from the war on Donbass. And I started thinking, what did they die for? They didn't die for anything that would have benefited them as a nation. They're dying for the bourgeois state. The bourgeois government controlled and working with a far right, you know, NATO and the United States to kill their own people. Ukraine has lost so many people because of this war, just through deaths, through people running away and leaving either the war region or leaving all of Ukraine. Because if you're 18 years older and you're a boy and you're not in school, you have to go fight in the war. So they've got a massive depopulation. They became the second poorest country in Eastern Europe. And all for what? And that's when I started to think, wait a second. I used to think Ukrainians were fascists. I think the Ukrainian government is an ultra-nationalistic government, but it does not represent the Ukrainian people, who are very good. And then you compare the way that the Ukrainian state is nationalistic now to the way that it was during the Soviet Union. During the Soviet Union, it was very patriotic. There was, the Ukrainian flag was very symbolic of what Ukraine stood for. Vishvankas with the hammer and sickle. They spoke, they taught their language. They had Ukrainian scouts. It was, very, very, patriotic, but not like this. And that's when I started to see there was a different characterization. There was a qualitative difference between these two nationalisms. And what's to say that Ukraine is so different than what the United States could be so different? You have to look at what American history is. And we have, so I took this journalism class and I studied about how there was this dude in the 1700s who got lynched and he was a white guy. He got lynched because he was writing an abolitionist paper. He got his first press was beaten and taken down by all the rich guys in the area. And then he moved to like the Midwest and did it again. And there he got lynched. I mean, that's all just to say that in the United States, like, there is a rich history of people trying to progress the country. The American Revolution was a really qualitative change in human history that brought, even though we can say, yes, these were bourgeois revolutions, it brought humanity closer. It brought humanity further. It advanced, the world. And just to have a very reductive, in my opinion, an outlook that helps nobody but the bourgeois state and divide workers, it's so futile. I mean, what do they think they're accomplishing other than virtue signaling that I'm woke. I hate my country. I hate my flag. You hate. You want to destroy. What are you trying to build? And I saw a really stupid tweet the other day by some revisionists that said, all workers of the world unite is a white communist version of saying all lives matter. And it's like, where do people get these damn things from? Where does the American worker not benefit?
The Heritage Foundation.
It's not just the white ones, the Asian ones, the native ones. We all benefit through, uniting as people in this country who work together, who have interests together. We all have that in unity. Why are people constantly trying to divide? Why are constantly people trying to sow hate amongst the working class? The international bourgeoisie is united. When can we?
Preach. Seriously, I feel like it is just virtue signaling for the most part,
No, sorry if I may. It's been a while.
Go ahead.
I've been hanging on this thread for a little bit.
Do it further.
I want to go back to what you said about Lenin's take on the American Revolution, and just since we're on the topic of the American Revolution, it's very often I discuss like a progressive defense of the American Revolution, or a progressive defense of the American Civil War, and you'd get somebody, as we're describing, radical liberal from the academic left, etc., ultra-leftist, who are like, well, have you considered that maybe Marx wasn't right about everything? Have you considered that he was incorrect about this? Maybe. What argument do you have to suggest that? Point at the history. I want you to learn the history, learn it in depth, learn it dialectically, right? Look at the facts on the ground, and I want you to come to me with an argument. What was so reactionary about abolishing slavery, right? The most I've gotten is the very removed, not very nuanced view that there was more radical forms of abolition. Well, there's more radical forms of communism today. Some defend Trotskyism as a more radical form of communism, but the point is that Trotskyism never came to power. Nowhere in the world has Trotskyism come to power. Marxism-Leninism got to power. So these radical forms of abolition in America, why didn't they come to power? Why didn't they abolish slavery? The less radical form of abolition did abolish slavery. Is that a bad thing? Is it a bad thing that Abraham Lincoln was the abolitionist that did it? I think the abolition of slavery is just a good thing in general. So again, please, the people, I implore everybody who's critical of American history, study it in depth. Right? You point to the CPUSA in the 1930s being supposedly white supremacist organization. Read the history. Make an argument. Don't just say it. Because I don't have a feeling. I know these people haven't studied it. I know these people don't know the history, and I know that if they study it, they'll be singing a very different tune. Because I truly believe that in their hearts, they want to be communists. In their hearts, they want to achieve socialism. They just don't have the knowledge. They don't have the understanding. and they're stuck. They're stuck with this outlook, this liberal outlook, that all history is reactionary. Everything that came before us is bad. That's not dialectical. It's not communist. It's not core to our values. It's reactionary. It's nihilistic, and we need to move past it.
I think that's kind of the problem with the internet and this like atmosphere of everyone trying to sort of perform intellectual superiority. And it goes to the point where they start lying, and it's very obvious to anyone who knows even a little bit about Marxism or the history that they really don't know what they're talking about, yet they will swear up and down they're the most educated, 19-year-old kid from the suburbs in the world, right? But once we learn this Marxism and learn the objective laws that govern the development of society, the Civil War, the Second American Revolution, as Marx called it, takes on a far greater clarity. And when all you're trying to do is say, hey, brother or sister or whoever you are, maybe learn about the stuff that you want to talk about. And I guarantee you'll come over with us and we can work together and do this. But this sort of social media atmosphere of, dunk-ons, and everyone wants to use each other to feel superior. It stands in the way of that. And for me, that means we need a concerted effort to fight that in an organized way rather than an individualized one.
And I just want to reemphasize the point because, I am a Black person. I have lived among African American, and actually where I'm from, I lived in Virginia for like 5 years, but where I've lived all my life is a neighborhood full of South Asians, full of Haitians, full of Colombians. My graduating class in my high school had about 5 white kids, and we were a class of over 400. You cannot tell me, what fantasy land do you live in? Sorry for me to be so aggressive, because I see this. You can't tell me that if you've grown up among these people that they are somehow going to be won over to say, well, death to America, abolish America. These people are immigrants themselves. They've got parents that are immigrants, and they come in there. Yes, they're proud of where they came from. I mean, I as well hang a Peruvian flag in my room, but they're also proud of where they are too. They're proud of, they're not proud of the Afghanistan war. They're not proud that there's, homeless people in, their own city. I live in New York City. We grew up in New York City. They're not proud of that. But what they're proud of is, that New York strong kind of mentality. They're proud of that they live in a city that was built off of working people who built this city, and every step that we take. They're proud of, New Yorkers helping New Yorkers, and always looking out for each other. They're proud of they're proud of where they are. They're proud of their community. They're proud of their neighbors, and they love them. You're going to, it's a waste of time to think that you're going to go and organize enough, colonized people, as they'll say, these colonized people. You're going to win them all to say death to America and all this. You're not. And you're going to, maybe you get 5, but you've just lost 30. Is that really, the route to take? Is that strategic? I don't think so, in my opinion. And then I think part of it too is that there's this idea that okay, well, Black and brown and colonized people in the United States are anti-American, and only white people support America. And so that's why we need to only focus on organizing Black and brown people, and we need to center them and prioritize them. Prioritizing among ethnic and racial lines, to me, that seems very odd. I think that we should, focus on class lines, and not to say that you ignore the contradictions of race and all that, but, understanding that their conditions, our conditions are not going to get, much better until we change the base, just like what Cuba did, just like what Venezuela had done. It's not going to really change unless we can change the base. So we should organize together. We're all united by our class. But anyway, let's say we want to, just organize only Black and brown people. We don't need the white people to lead a revolution, to change the country. 1, you're not organizing the majority. And 2, what are you going to do leading 17% of the nation into a revolution? To me, that sounds like you're going to get a lot of people fucked up.
Even that's wishful thinking, because as you've said, the majority of those people still are proud of America. They still
Mhm.
identify with America. You're not organizing 17%. You're organizing like 0.05% if you're just
Right.
if you're going out with that
You're
like
organizing a
anti-American.
bunch of grad students.
Yeah, exactly.
People with PhDs who are dumb.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wait, Eric, we had a question. You want to answer it? It's on. It was on Haywood, I believe.
Oh yeah. I was wondering
Yeah,
if you guys
if
wanted
so,
No,
to.
I wanted to take it, but it's your party, so I don't know. I'll give you.
No. Go ahead.
No, no, it's like
It's-
it refers to his
me.
party. So if you want to take it, I think you should.
well, I have a quote that may like maybe illuminate. Now it disappeared. If you want to start, Noah.
No, do you
Yeah.
want to take it? Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I've read Harry Haywood's biography, The Black Bolshevik, and it's one of the most interesting books I've ever read. I love that book, and I really wish that the 350 missing pages that got edited out were available. I don't know a lot about the his split, but I know there were a few different factions at the time in the party, and it was mostly based on, a lot of people say like, oh, the Communist Party were white supremacists, which is utterly absurd. But it was mostly based on the way the Black community decided to organize itself. And that was where the issue came up. And that there were some incorrect lines taken by leadership that were against Haywood in other ways is not part of that general issue.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was at a time, as far as I know, I believe after the quote so-called secret speech of Khrushchev. So Gus Hall, who was the party leader, was this was a point of contention towards the late 50s within the party, and he wanted to kind of have it settled before 1960, just to move on and have like a more unified, disciplined party. Someone who was, I know that W.B. Du Bois was opposed to the idea at that time. He was one of the figures lobbying because of the belief that among other things, and post the Great Migration, the black community within the United States didn't constitute a nation at that point in time. Obviously, dialectical thinking requires us to adapt our stance on certain things depending on the time. So if the CPUSA changes their position from the 1920s to the 1950s, there's a 30-year difference. That doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong or right, and they're just adapting to how the masses felt. So someone who also, another Black Party leader, Henry Winston, who is a prolific writer of his own right, he had this to say about the black belt thesis, and he did not use kind words. He says, the supposedly, quote, revolutionary, in parentheticals, even so-called Marxist books on the colony analogy now in mass circulation were written by white radicals who have abandoned the struggle against racism and by Black radicals who seek rhetorical shortcuts to liberation. By portraying Black people collectively in the US as a colony, these radicals assist the ruling class's aim of diverting the Black liberation movement from a winning strategy, one that would advance the self-organization of the Black liberation movement and simultaneously combine this independent strength with that of its allies, the working class, Black, brown, yellow, red, and white, together with all the poor and exploited in a new formation. This is the basis for an anti-monopoly coalition, the only strategy that opens the way to a future without racism, without exploitation, poverty, or oppression. And I mean, that's sort of, I think, that's kind of a frame of thinking that we can go ahead with thinking about patriotism in general. Perhaps perhaps there was a certain way to speak about the the American state in the 50s or the 60s. Maybe it was a way to engage the masses more if you sort of were more I guess aggressive or whatever. that doesn't necessarily mean that it should be. Well, we've learned that that's failed, is what I guess. Like we've learned that burning flags, using the triple K kind of like notation for America, being very anti-American actually drives the communist movement away from workers. So therefore we should adapt. And I think that's something that we can learn from Henry Winston.
Yeah, that's something I've said a lot. That like the American, what is the more powerful efforts within the American radical left, which I'd say since the '80s is sadly not any coherent, organized communist party. It's actually a bit more like anarchist sectors. At least where I lived in the U.S., the only organization you had were anarchistic, and it's had the strategy of anti-American sentiment, of anti-patriotic positions. And it's failed, from like 1980s to 2010. What big victory did the left have? There's nothing, not a single thing.
Chance after chance after chance, and we blow them all. Yeah, and it's because of that. Occupy is a perfect example.
Occupy just absolutely miserable. Like honestly, at the time, it felt very. It felt like a wave of fresh air because it had been so long since anything had happened. But if you look at it back now, and it's cringe, dude. It's like it's horrible.
The first time I did the up twinkles, I called it a day.
Well, and that was I think. Sorry, Kayla, go.
Well, I just think it's really important that we get this shit together now, because just as possible that it is for us in the United States, because I think that this country is headed towards its decline. Neoliberalism, capitalism cannot survive, and we know this to be true. But we have the real potential to build socialism in this country, which there are some people that would say, well, that's just not real socialism because it's a settler country. Like,
oh my god. Okay, what about Cuba?
Whatever. Cuba, Venezuela, potentially Peru, it's okay because they're more brown. I don't know, whatever. We have the potential to build socialism here, but we also have the potential to build fascism. And maybe someone here can speak to the history a bit better, but one of the things that the German fascists did, to build a more popular movement was that they held a monopoly on what it meant to be German, and German people, really German nationalism instead of German patriotism. And so I think it's very similar to the situation that we're in, that, we need to either get clear on this, get correct and come correct. And, the parties that hold the line of American patriotism over American nationalism need to, we need to advance that. Like Eric was saying before, come out with American flags. Like there was, I don't know if it was the anti-Asian hate rally or a rally with for China, but you see when China comes and they have American visitors come, they wave an American flag with the Chinese flag. We need to do the same thing over here. When we go and stand in solidarity with Venezuela and all those other anti-war marches, we need to wave the American flag in solidarity with those other flags to show this is no. The bourgeoisie is not going to have a monopoly on what it means to be American. The right-wing fascists are not going to have a monopoly on what it means to be an American. We as the working class need to have a monopoly on that. And we need to stand for anti-imperialism because we're anti-imperialist. Imperialism is sucking us dry. We need to be anti-racist. We need to have a monopoly on patriotic anti-racism because anti-racism is keeping us divided as working class people. And not to say that race, because there's going to be someone that's going to say, not to say that racism is merely just a tool to keep workers divided, but as it exists right now is keeping workers divided, is it not? So anyway, that's just my long rant to say that we need to get our shit together. We need to have monopoly on American patriotism because the right wing is trying to do that. And I think that's why people have these fears. Well, look, the right wings are nationalists. They wave the American flag.
No, something. Sorry, Eric. It's just something important but brief. Kayla touched on something important there, which was one of the blunders of the commenters' strategy during the 30s, which was the class against class moment period, or 20s, 1920s. where patriotic ideas, things that might have been seen too much nationalistic were shut away from, where the communist parties were seen as having to expose like the ruling government. That oftentimes turned into anti-patriotic sentiment, and it sowed the seeds for fascism's rise. One of the persons who was on the ground in Germany at the time, which was Georgy Dimitrov, when the next International Congress of Working Parties happened, one of his biggest takeaways from the failure of the German Communist Party was that they were not seen as patriotic. Mm-hmm. That is one of the central things that you see in the development of the communist movement in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And that led, perhaps you could call it an overcorrection. I think that it was pretty spot on. The strategy of the Popular Front, they put patriotism as the core and center of that strategy. The communists in the West, the communists need to be seen as the most democratic, the most patriotic, the most the biggest defenders of the values of the liberal countries, because it was a force against fascism. And today, in America, you have a potential for a very similar strategy where you can put the working class aspirations, the core values of America, against the monopolist bourgeoisie. You can build a huge coalition around, the right for freedom of speech, the right for excuse me, I choked. But these certain rights, right, like the right for assembly, etc., as you have the technocrats in Silicon Valley, in the American bourgeoisie, increasingly censoring speech that goes against the dominant narrative. It's not they're not even defending American values; they're defending their own asses, right? Like if you go on Twitter and you speak against the Afghanistan war, they don't care if you are a third position, if you're a communist, or if you're just a concerned citizen, right? They just censor you, right? And right there, you have two paths you can take. You can take it into a bourgeois reactionary, like nationalist position, where it's like, well, you have the Jews doing this and that, and it's like you get into some very dark shit very quickly. Or you can just point out the obvious. The communist answer makes so much more sense. These guys profit from war, and they don't want you speaking out against it. It's intuitive. Working people will respond to it immediately. Absolutely. But like these guys are so like the ultra leftists are so fucking chicken shit. They're not. They're like, oh no, I don't want to. I don't want to be canceled on Twitter. Like, you're just a coward. You're just a fucking coward.
Look, at the end of the day, you're never going to get anyone to support hating everyone around them. You're not going to get people to, if you go knock on a door and say, hi, I'm a communist. I want to make your life worse. I hate everything you believe in. Come and follow me. You're spitting on them at that point. J.B. Stalin said it best. We meet people where they are, not where we would like them to be. Yeah. Right. And when you tell them like, hey, all of these ideals that you have a deep-seated love for, fuck them. Right. What does that do? That pushes them to the right. That pushes them into the arms of a con man like Trump. Right. Who says, I want to bring you better jobs. I want to do this and this and this. And, people are desperate. Those same imperialists that we talk about exploiting the third world, how did they get this production there, right? Because all this production, steel especially, cars, used to happen right here in America. And our class struggle rose up against them, created things like the 8-hour day, the weekend, and end to child labor, and demanded fairer wages, right? People fought and died for that. And these people act like the imperialists, just like we're like, oh, here you go, have this money, and please just don't do it. No, of course not. We fought and died for that. And when we won it, they took it to a place that was less developed so that they could continue with this exploitation at a higher level. And when they did that, they harmed not just the third world, but us as well, because it stripped us of that level of class struggle. It was a giant blow against us. And at the same time, they're union busting, and we had, McCarthyism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get to today, and we're just beginning to rebuild. And we have these fucking liberals with their, I'm so sorry to swear, with their sort of like moralist stance. Like, oh, it's so bad to be American. You're right, Fernando. It's cowardice. It's plain cowardice. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get all heated or anything. It's just.
No, I think you were the last one to get into the anger of it all. I think that I think that people, like a quick aside, people think that the CPUSA was like like somehow automatically like chauvinistic, and that like the communism was like the side thing, like it was like it at its sort of height. But in reality, a leader its leaders like William Z. Foster, and I guess Earl Browder as well, were responding to what the masses wanted. Like, you were in the era of the 1930s, there was no leadership. Nobody wanted to. They were looking to Europe and seeing Mussolini, Hitler, Franco arise. And a lot of people, because there was because of the pitfalls of a lot of left or communists in Europe, they went to fascism. It wasn't because fundamentally communists have the right set of values. We understand if we don't make them clear to the masses, they won't come to us. Like, it's not like we can. It's not, as you said, as Joseph Stalin said, we have to go to them. We can't come. But I think that people don't understand that we have to. Or I'm repeating myself, but you get the gist.
Let me say one more thing on this real quick. I'm sorry to butt in. It's not a communist job to go to the masses and tell them what to think and what to feel, right? If these people who do this, they have this abstract idea of worker, right? But it's not a basis in reality. In reality, they hate workers. They hate the working class. They feel themselves above the working class because they come from this sort of more comfortable petty bourgeois background. When you're a communist, your job isn't to, tell them like you're wrong and awful and I hate you. It's to take the genuine needs of the masses, and our masses aren't just like shitty masses. They can do what every other mass can do. It's to take those needs, those material necessities, and formulate it into a revolutionary and progressive a line of march, as Foster used to call it, right? And sort of guide all of us. The vanguard that will establish is not just like standing above the working class, acting as some sort of missionary or something. It is the most advanced section of the working class.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, for example, recently, what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, imagine if there was an actual vanguard that could actually lead the people that were there. Imagine what the situation would have looked like, or what the situation would look like now. I think we're missing a qualitative issue. Part of this is that we don't have the proper leadership, and because a lot of the people that would be potential great leaders don't know the history, because our history has been red washed out of our history books.
I love that term.
Yeah, it really has. Like, we get fed this bourgeois ideology and history and culture from our media and from the people who work in academia with their PhDs, and tell us that American workers are not revolutionary, especially white ones, and nothing's going to happen here, so give up. They're the foot soldiers of the ultra rich. They're the foot soldiers of the imperialists. We now have a situation. We now have a situation where they don't have to send the CIA anymore, and or they don't have to do like the trials that they did back in the 40s and 50s. Because now they have people in academia, in the news, and in our movements doing that for them, calling themselves leftists when they're not.
On Twitter.
And on Twitter. So, right. I think we got to get to the masses with the correct history and the correct historical materialist analysis. And I would really recommend William Z. Foster, among others. He has the correct history and I really recommend him if I were to recommend anyone.
Yeah, he writes outline. Well, there's I guess a lot. I think what is interesting is a lot of people, when they are reaching like a sort of adolescent radical phase, they go and purchase, or someone gives them Howard Zinn, like they get like the People's History of the United States, which is fine. It's all true, but it doesn't present a sort of way forward. It doesn't present a progressive history. It just presents like a sort of deconstructive, critical history. And Foster is one of those people that actually does have a, like, if you don't want to read Chomsky, read Parenti. If you don't want to read Zinn, read William Z. Foster's Outline Political History of the Americas. And he writes about the struggles like of all oppressed nations within and classes within the United States. And I think that's something that it sort of, which I think that you were kind of getting to know up previously, is workers are not actually reactionary. Like there's this myth that in the United States that workers are inherently backwards. And I think it's because of this lack of leadership on the left, there really is no way of sort of providing like a symbol or like something to make that clear. I think when a lot of mass media, a lot of corporate media love to portray working people as like the wretched, the deplorables that support Trump, when in reality, most people, and I think Bernie actually did a really good job of this, of saying that, well, let's take a vote, like, or let's show the polls, like, who supports Medicare for all, who supports gay marriage, who supports like all these progressive, I guess, ideals. I mean, like how many like local suburbs across the country marched for Black Lives last year? Like there is a movement, there is a proletarian like progressivism within the masses of people. It's just that there isn't that leadership to really embody it. And I think that that's something I remember they're talking about. I don't remember the direct quote, but they were talking about like Chavez didn't make the movement made Chavez in Venezuela. And I think that that's something that we can't really wait for in the United States. I think that maybe someone needs to give history a push for us, but I think that that's something that we really need to embody, is working people are not reactionary. And maybe you're the one that has these backwards inclinations through just petty bourgeois thinking.
Right. And I just want to
nominate Caleb.
I want to add one thing, because a lot of this has to do the reason a lot of people on the synthetic left or these like third worldists like to claim, oh well, workers here in America are too conservative or too backward because they make too much money. That's not correct. I
mean, they can believe that, but that makes them not Marxists.
Right. Well, right. But like the reason a lot of this is because like our unions there's a lot of they're highly bureaucratized and they struggle for reformism and it fails. And that's what drives people to more backward conservative ideas.
Yeah, you got to look if you look into the history of the union movement and the way they were smashed and infiltrated and sort of neutered, right? Made it effective. It's really sad and just very effective class struggle against us. But it continues on anyway, right? It's a law of development and we'll overcome it. I think this period of rebuilding we're in now and getting over this hurdle of ultra-leftism and petty bourgeois radicalism of all types is the period. That's how this period right now is going to be defined. The 2020s were sort of the period of liberalism and fake radicalism and, sort of hipster irony posing as communism. And I feel like the 2020s are going to be marked by realness, heart, and genuine communism. We're already seeing everything rebuilding. We're seeing, groups in my area that used to bicker and fight over every tiny little thing, working together and creating a broad mass organization anyway. And, even seeing other parties building up and gaining in membership, it just shows me that, we're on an upswing. And when we grasp the right tactics and overcome the effective tactics of the bourgeois class, which I don't care what any third worldist will tell you, that's what they are. That's when I completely lost what I was saying. Anyway, it's inevitable. Communism will win.
Revolutionary optimism.
Yes.
I think that we can also just ignore these types. I don't think that we need to, try to organize the left anymore. You know what? You want to either get with it, become a Marxist. And I think what happened in Peru definitely showed that you can still have these ultra leftists and these rad libs running around and bickering and battering. And ultimately, our line is going to prevail. But we have to be among the masses. So if they want to go ahead and continue to divide the workers, I mean, they're going to be rejected. The workers are not. It's history has shown this. They're not going to win. They're going to fall out of relevance. But to get back to Eric's point real quick about why these people genuinely do hate their own working class. They hate the working class. Whatever they say, oh no, we just want to pull out the contradictions. No, you hate your working class. It's really what comes down to it, and you can see it when they attribute the crimes of the imperialists and the capitalists to the working class. Or they'll say, hey, look, 55% of Americans support the war. Well, how are Americans taught about the war? Because I want to ask, you point an American out to say, hey, do you support the war in Afghanistan? Because we're going to liberate them and we're going to stop terrorism and we're going to stop, ISIS and all that stuff, Al-Qaeda. We're going to stop all that and we're going to bring them democracy and freedom. They're going to say, okay, I support that. But if you actually showed them, hey, we're going in there and we're going to, take your money. So, no health care, no better education. We're going to take this money and we're going to go occupy this country and we're going to send your children to die. And we're going to set up a puppet government over there. We're going to oppress them and kill them as well, kill children, mothers, all that stuff. And we're going to take a lot of oil. Would you support that? I have a hard time believing that a lot of Americans, anybody would support that. So, they forget what people are taught. They forget that we're not taught that what sanctions actually do. We're just taught, well, these socialist countries are just spontaneously. So, for some self-declared socialists, somehow, they have no idea of dialectics. They're not, materialists at all. They're nihilistic. They're anarchists at heart. They think that being a true communist is to be just go all the way left as far as you can go and become an entire stereotype. And you know what? We don't need them. We don't need them. Like I said, if Peru showed us anything, it's that we don't need them. We just need to stay true to who we are, organize and build our parties among the people that we need. We need the working class. We need the people.
Damn straight.
We don't need these, PhD 19-year-olds that are going to tell people who've been in parties for 50 years how to run their shit. Come into a meeting.
Right.
Actually, humble yourself. Me included. We need to be humbled.
So, okay, real quick. I'm sorry.
Go for it. Make it real quick.
Thing. Okay. So the only reason that this even comes up is because they pretend they're us and they make us look bad. That's the only reason. Otherwise, there's 6 Maoists, in their suburb could go be Maoists in a suburb, That's the only reason they pretend or make us look bad. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Fernando.
No, it's all good. I was just having a bit of a bet. Eric asked us a while ago if we could break down the characteristics of bourgeois patriotism and proletarian patriotism. So I wanted to get to that because it's been hanging there for a while. Just right off the bat, I think that bourgeois patriotism is a red herring. It is false. It is a lie. It is a lie used to be able to maintain popularity within a liberal democracy, because at the end of the day, liberal democracy has advanced to the point where there is universal suffrage. So if a ruling party wants to stay in power, they need to appeal to the masses somehow. So a very good way that the right wing could do it is it appeals to shallow super patriotism, jingoism, whatever we want to call it. But if you look at their actions, or you look at their deeds, what patriotic things do? They put their money in banks outside of the country. They don't pay taxes. They get into wars. They get the people killed. As much as the third worlders might want to pretend otherwise, the money that they take from the other countries, they keep it to themselves, right? And then the value that is extracted from within their own country, they're taking that as well. They're exploiting their own people. How is that patriotic? There's nothing patriotic about bourgeois nationalism, bourgeois patriotism. The only true patriotism is working class. It is a duty to your country, a duty to your people, a duty to your community. It is self-sacrifice to make your society better, to leave a better future for the next generation, to make the world better, not just for your people, but everybody else in the world. That is the only consistent, coherent, real form of patriotism. And quick note, a lot of radical liberals, ultra-left types, when somebody like me, when a proper communist goes and tells you, hey, we need to appeal to conservative people too, right? In their heads, it just distorts, it twists, and they just cannot make sense of it. What I just said to you right now is a very easy and a very intuitive way for right-wingers to understand the communist appeal. You tell that to a right-winger, they're going to see where you're coming from. They're not going to think you're this caricature, of the left that a lot of people, as we've said, they actually adopt. They're going to be like, you know what, I like what you're putting down. You probably convince them. If you put out there and you show them that you are working class, that you are here for a better America, for a better Chile, for a better Peru, whatever country, right? They're going to be with you because they are for that. They want their country to be better. Nobody wants their country to be worse. And if you prove to them that you're the way forward, they're going to be with you.
So yeah, I do got to step out now, guys, but please continue this conversation. And I just want to say one last thing that, like I said before, we don't need to organize the left. We need to organize the masses. And the masses aren't part of these, university activists, settlers reading, petite bourgeois people. And you know what? Because I know none of you guys can get away with saying it, but I'm going to say it. I don't care if you're black and brown. If you spew this bullshit that divides our class, like, you are not doing anything anti-racist. You are keeping us from anti-racism. You are keeping us from, socialism. So, go posture, go, do what makes you feel cathartic, but at least stop doing it in the name of communism, because you are no Marxist. You are a self-serving individualist who wants nothing more than to look cool and woke and feel good about yourself. And if that's all right, do that. Do that alone in your room. Like I said, you and your 6 Maoist third brothers can go play in the park and let the real Marxists do what we gotta do. And with that, have a good night. Love you guys.
Good night.
Love you, Kayla. Thank you.
Vote for Pedro Castillo if you're Peruvian in the chat. Also, what are you doing here?
There
was
night,
something
right?
that we could answer real quick, actually, from earlier. I'm trying to grab it. Oh, here.
While you pull it, I'll go later. Never mind. Sorry. Thought it would take longer.
No, he's quick, brother. You gotta watch out for Eric.
Okay. If nobody else wants to take this question, I'll take it. I think that you're mistaking.
Well, can you read it? I didn't.
Oh,
you didn't see it?
Yeah. You just hold it up. Let's keep it up there.
I didn't mean to click it off.
Well, I think a lot of people just
did.
listen to it. So you may want to read
that's
it
true.
aloud. Yeah.
So, okay, I'll go for it. Particular issue with U.S. patriotism isn't even that it's settler-colonial, but its particular ideology and patriotism isn't being liberal. I think that there's a mistake of confusing the form with the content, right? The content can take different forms. Currently, it's the liberal form because liberals have the hegemony, right? You have right-wing liberalism in the Republican Party and like left-wing woke liberalism in the Democratic Party, right? How could you have like a communist interpretation of something like freedom of speech? I think Cuba does it very well, where the state finances local radios and local TV programs to put in like the perspective of working class people throughout the island, right? In America, a working class person from Wisconsin, how do they get on national TV, right? Like, they could try to go on, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, or they could debase themselves and embarrass themselves on like reality TV, but like, how do they put their community needs and their necessities into national TV? They can't.
This sort of brings up something I wanted to mention earlier, that a lot of these people, they don't have a Marxist world outlook. They genuinely don't see the world according to dialectical materialism. So they make these mistakes of dogmatism, right? And so they see, what the Soviet Union believed it had to do regarding repressing forms of speaking out against socialism, and that was, within their context, their history, etc. The United States, our context, our history is in freedom of debate, and any socialism that when socialism comes here, it's only going to be American socialism. We're not going to just copy old Soviet policies from when they were about to be invaded by the Nazis. That's crazy. No one would do that. No one in their right mind would do that. You measure and to quote Stalin again, right? Everything depends on the time, place, and conditions.
Yeah, I think that and maybe I really haven't done much of, I guess, reading of like left communist, critiques of the idea of like democracy and patriotism as inherently liberal, and therefore we shouldn't be like discussing them as communists. But I do think that there's a clear, I think going back to what Georgy Dimitrov was speaking about with the Popular Front against fascism. If you look at, I guess, sort of like the French and the German and the British communist parties, there was a greater weakness of that understanding of patriotism. Now, if you look at Romanian or Yugoslavian, Albanian, or East German, I guess, there were these popular fronts that were considered with the masses. They were very they may have worked with democratic progressive parties, but inherently they were seen as patriotic, and that was a means to achieve power. I think that people don't understand that patriotism is a tool. It's not, there's no moral, you really can't add like a moralistic argument to whether or not it's good or bad. There are people who use it for bad means. There are people that use it for good means, but it will be used. So if we don't use it, other people will. And I think that that's what is lost on a lot of comrades. And we should use it, because if we don't, who will?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well said, brother. Well said.
We got another one here. If you can make arguments to conservatives for your position, but explain why it's what a conservative should support. For example, we can use our taxes better than subsidizing Amazon.
I mean, yeah, like a way that my party appeals to conservatives a lot is defending family values, but from the left, right? Like, when someone hears family values in America, you think anti-abortion, right, anti-gay, et cetera, but you could easily, give it a complete different spin. Here we go to working class people, people who have horrible access to healthcare, horrible access to education, horrible access to their homes, they live on the edge of a hill, and there's shitty staircases. Old people fall down all the time. A lot of people die that way, right? People who can't walk all that well, and we say, hey, pro-family propositions for here. Let's build a school in this district, right? Let's build a hospital here, right? Let's give the young the kids in this area, better quality of life. And if you pitch that as a pro-family proposition in America, right? Like more funding for schools, right? You can do stuff like that. I don't know if there's any shantytowns left in America, but hey,
there's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, then you go there and you say, hey, let's give these people proper homes, right? You can pitch that to conservatives and be like, this is a pro family legislation or proposal or campaign or whatever, and they're gonna understand what you mean. They're like, I don't want my kids, growing up in a shantytown. I don't want my kids, being 40 minutes away from a hospital. I don't want my kids to have to bike to school an hour. That I had to do that when I lived in the US. Was it fun?
Yeah. No. People need to see themselves in our ideas. Gus Hall said that. Gus Hall said one of the key ingredients in a revolutionary struggle is people en masse. People do not respond to commands or to exonerations. they do not respond to ideas, even good ideas, if they do not see their self-interest involved in these ideas. So that's something that we really need to master
I
and
think
take to the masses.
one of the things that I think about is how a lot of like Bush era liberalism was centered around the hypocrisy of the right, and how I guess like, oh well, if you're a Christian, why are you for war? Or like, oh, if you're so pro-life, why do you want children, like 1 in 3 children, being hungry or sleeping on the street? And it was done in a very opportunistic and empty way by the Democratic Party, because obviously the Democratic Party doesn't give a damn either. But if communists could be like, well, why is it in the richest country we starve 1/3 of our children? Why is it that we need to that we don't make it easier for young people to start a life? Why can't, like, I think that's something that I think of Michael Parenti saying that the revolution for the people, I think the people that feed the children get my support. The revolution, no matter what, not blindly, but what, like, that people that are able to sort of bring material change to the masses of people get the support. And I also think of a quote from Tucker Carlson, who basically said the what was it, the movement,
You gotta get trouble for that one.
the movement that is able to let young men and women settle down in America will reign for the next 50 years at least.
I think
that sort.
I think so for me, I really like what you just said, Eric, by the way. For me, when I appeal to conservatives, and I've made communism supporters of pretty much all my coworkers who are, like burly carpenters and Finnish painters and Finnish carpenters, and they all were self-described libertarians and conservatives before that. And what I do is I show them that the cartoon that the ruling class paints of us as these like extra liberals isn't who we are. We're not extra liberals, right? We're against that liberal establishment. And I play on the positive values that they have. So one of the big ones is genuinely thinking that people should work for what they get. Now, only communism truly fulfills that, right? It's not, poor people getting a handout. It's the bourgeoisie living off of us like vampires, like leeches, right? That's why Marx called them parasites and vampires. And so when I talk to them about, Amazon, for example, I go, Bezos has been living off of all of us for a long time, stealing the value that we create and we give them, and our government takes from us in taxes and whatever else. So I say we take it back by any means necessary. And if that means taxing him specifically and Amazon specifically, so be it, and whatever else, other way,
like working people intuitively feel like a piece is being taken out of them. They intuitively feel that something's being stolen from them. The right wing weaponizes that. To say like, oh, it's the immigrants, it's the single mothers, it's the people on welfare, and the reason they respond well to it is because, again, they have that feeling. But it's very, very easy to be like, hold up, let's just take a quick look, like let's look at the stats. And Democrats do this, right? But as Arbor said, it's very opportunistic. It's they point it out and then they don't do anything with it. Communists need to point it out and be like, so this is what we do, this is what we advocate for, and it's got to be in the program. Right, and it's gotta be backed up by action. This is something we can get into this whole debate. The ultra left inherently completely rejects elections. They're like, if you run elections, you're a revisionist, you're a reformist. They don't. Again, elections, like patriotism, as Arbor said, they're a tool, right? They are a tool. They're not a means to take power because that's not possible, right? But they can be used for many ways. If you see how many people vote for you, you have a sense of how many people support you in a certain place immediately. That's very useful for any communist party. You can use it to then propose different things, right? Like if I change your program, you see how people respond. You can use it to go fixing your line. If you don't run elections, how do you verify that the people are responding well to what you say? You have no idea, right? Like, I got a big cheer at a rally the other day. Like that tells you nothing. Briefly, the last thing is, like, if you get into a city council, and CPUSA did win a city council at an election, I think in 2017, 2018. Then you can start, like, as a city council. What's the job of somebody who's in city councils? They got to go to different neighborhoods and talk to them. What's happening? What are the demands? And they go and they talk to the mayor. They're in a meeting and they're like, hey, this, and this. A communist can take that and turn it up to 11. Right, like when a mayor is pushing for some anti-proletarian law or action, whatever. Or let's say we have a communist city council in Flint, Michigan, right? Like you go to all the working class neighborhoods who have lead in the water, all right, and you take them on a march and you tell the mayor, hey, if you don't fucking fix this, we're gonna burn the city down. I promise you, the pipes are gonna get fixed real quick.
We're gonna burn some flags.
We're gonna spell America with 3 K's. You like it. But yeah, no, I think this is a great place to wrap, guys. I think we covered a lot. I think this is great, and I greatly appreciate everyone in the chat participating and giving us your thoughts and support. Why don't we wrap up and tell people where they can find your work? Why don't we start with Fernando?
Richland. I don't have a lot of work. I have like a little Soapbox YouTube channel. I hardly use it. I use it when I want to get out. There's something bugging me, and I can't fit it into Twitter. But Twitter, you can follow me. Rojo Chilean is right there. It's on your screen. And again, member of the Chilean Communist Party Proletarian Action. It's a party down here in the faraway country of Chile. Follow them as well. PCAP. And last thing, Kayla said it. She had to leave, but it's. I think it's something worth emphasizing. Everything I say, every time I criticize an ultra-leftist, it's a lifeline. I'm putting it out there so that, like, they can shake off their ideological baggage and become a proper communist. The working class is going to advance with or without you. Yeah. So it's up to you. Do you want to be part of this movement or not? Do you want to just do you want to say or do you want to do? It's time to make up your mind. The big reason why so many people fall into that trap is because they do not let go of their liberalism. They have a lot of liberal baggage, and it's hard. I know. I went through it. I was an ultra-leftist. I'm pretty sure every single communist was an ultra-leftist at some point. You need to develop past it, and until you do, you're stuck. So again, do you want to be part of the revolution or not? It's up to you.
Well said, brother.
Well said.
For me, I'm working on getting my own channel established, so that'll be coming in the near future. I actually just had a meeting with the guy helping me write the theme song today, so look for that very soon. But I think I can't say it better than Fernando. We want you to come with us. It takes a little humility, though, and to let go of this bourgeois ego that we all have. Gus Hall used to call it the baggage we all bring with us when we decide we want to be communists. That's why I think, communism shouldn't be something we decide to call ourselves individually. It should be something the collective and the people that have been around longer and know more than us sort of bestow on us.
Yeah, I think that this sort of left is it's a historical trend that would have happened regardless. I think that we're just able to wake up from decades of synthetic leftism. I think that obviously people within academia have access to the right theory, just the wrong conclusions because they don't have that sort of experience with class struggle. I think that we're finally seeing that we're seeing working people really put that sort of synthetic leftism to task now. And I think I'm very optimistic for how the next few years are going to carry out and how Marxism in the West is more refined, and it makes better comrades, better parties, and we're in a crisis era of petty bourgeois radicalism. But with these conversations, with figures like us and people who are able to kind of not be afraid to speak about it. I think that we're slowly chiseling away in the right path. And I guess that's really all I have to say.
Well said, guys. I'm really honored to have you join me in this discussion. Hopefully we'll do this again very, very soon, because we can go on for days, I feel like, on this topic, because it's so important right now, especially during this awakening crisis. So we will definitely plan another one very soon. And thank you again for everyone watching and giving your support. We appreciate it, and we will be back soon.
Bye.
Everybody.
Good night.